welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 91, and the title of this episode is The Economic Collapse Agenda is Always the Same. It doesn't matter who is steering the ship. And let's get right into the economic collapse news. Actually, before we do that, I just want to let everyone know next week I will be back on my normal schedule. Just, on the road, and I'm in a different location, and that's why my reports are coming out a little later, and I'm not updating as much as I normally do. But next week I'll be back right on schedule, and we'll be going forward from there. And let's get back into the economic collapse news. The U.S. Mint sales of silver coins reached record in 2013 for the first half of the year. So basically what everyone's doing is buying physical silver. Doesn't matter what the paper markets are doing. Doesn't matter what you see on the news. People are buying physical. I know I am. I know many people who are buying physical because we all know. And let's not just go by what our friends or relatives are doing or not doing. Let's look at countries. Let's look at what banks are doing. Let's look at what central banks are doing. China is buying gold and silver. Russia is buying gold and silver. The central banks are buying gold and silver. There is only one reason why banks are buying gold and silver. There's only one reason everyone is doing this, because this is real money. Ink on paper is not. If I go back in time, what would you rather have? A piece of paper with ink on it from 400 years ago, or a gold coin? Think about that for a second. Now, I know everyone has forgotten about Cyprus, but I like to bring it up every now and then. Cyprus capital controls are hurting the economy, says the Commerce Minister. So basically, the capital controls since March are still in effect, and they're saying since people cannot take out money, spend money, it is having a huge effect on the economy of Cyprus. So what this tells us is they can't release the capital controls because every single person in Cyprus would do a bank run on the system. So they need to keep these capital controls in effect, and they don't care if it hurts the economy. If it hurts the economy, guess what they have to do? Cyprus will need to either sell their gold or borrow more money. And this is basically what it is. And basically this article goes on to say total deposits in Cyprus banking system dropped 9.9% in April to 57.4 billion euros from 63.7 billion euros in March, reflecting the bail-in of Bank of Cyprus depositors with savings of more than 100,000 euros. The Central Bank of Cyprus said of those accounts, 37.5% were converted into equity, while a further 22.5% are temporarily blocked to ensure Bank of Cyprus meets the terms of its recapitalization. So basically what we can see here is capital controls and keeping the people from getting their money is absolutely not working. And how do we know it's not working? Because the president of Cyprus asked the central banks and the European nations to remove the capital controls, and that has not been done. And they are still in effect, and we will continually see Cyprus be hurt by these capital controls. Okay, let's move on here. Experts, the Fed is creating a number of significant and dangerous leverage-driven speculative bubbles between now and 2014, and we know this for a fact. Basically, what is happening is the Fed is creating a stock, a treasury bond bubble, and a real estate bubble at this point. And these bubbles are growing and growing and growing. And we know the Fed is responsible for this, even though they tell us they are not. Back in before 2008, when asked, "Are you creating a real estate bubble?" they said, "No, there is no real estate bubble." And basically, there was a real estate bubble. So I've said this in the past, whenever government officials, the Fed, central bankers, whenever they say something, always think the opposite, because they never tell you the truth. They never want you to figure out what is going on. Even the mainstream media is on their side, and they will continually tell you something. And when they tell you something, it is always the opposite. And when they're telling you to buy, get into the stock market, actually do the opposite. Do not get into the stock market, because put it this way. Ben Bernanke a couple of weeks ago was daring people to get into the stock market. And he basically said, "I dare you." And when someone tells you, "I dare you," especially the person who's supposed to be, the head of the economy, the person who's supposed to be understanding of what's going on, making it better for the people, for him to come out and say, "I dare you," that should tell you right there and then not to get into the stock market. Because in 2006, 2007, when asked about the subprime and asked about are we going into a recession, basically in 2008 that was asked, he says the Fed doesn't foresee any type of recession in the not too distant future. And guess what happened in October into 2009? A recession. So he has no idea what he is talking about. Actually, let me rephrase this. He does have an idea. He's just not letting you know what is going on. The people of the world. Because their agenda is to steal the wealth from the people by doing this. Now, I know Bernanke came out and he was discussing about tapering, the money printing. Let me just tell you, this is no way in the world going to happen. They need to continually print, 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 print. Give this money to the banks. Let the banks, the institutional investors, put this back into the stock market and keep this baby pumped up. If they start to taper, oh wait, just the mention of taper, what happened to the markets? The markets now are down by 200 points or so. Now, is it going to stay like that? No. I mean, when the market is teetering on a disaster here, gold was pushed down $31 or so. The Dow 200 or so plus points, and the S&P 23 points. Just for mentioning that the Fed might taper the money printing. And basically, Bernanke in this article goes on to say, on what that has to do with interest rates, we were a little puzzled by that. And the article goes on to say, almost exactly 8 years after Greenspan, now infamous conundrum, comments about the unprecedented persistence of low long-term interest rates, Bernanke is now puzzled at the dramatic rise in interest rates following his recent taper remarks. Have no fear, though, just as Greenspan noted, I am reasonably certain we would not automatically assume that it would mean what it meant in the past. Bernanke said today that the sharp rise in rates was not about the taper, but due to other factors, including optimism about the economy. Let's say that's pretty much bullshit. The rise in interest rates and everything that's going on has nothing to do with the optimism of the economy getting better. And he goes on about, it's difficult to judge whether the markets are in sync or not. Generally speaking, though, I think what I've seen from the analysts and market participants is not widely different from what the committee is thinking and trying, as I tried today to communicate. I think the most important thing I just want to convey again is that it's important not to say this date, that date, this time. Of course, this is what he's saying. It's called political financial babble. What is happening is interest rates are rising, inflation is going up, money printing doesn't work. Back in the Great Depression, they contracted the money supply. So Bernanke, being a student of the Great Depression, said we are going to do the opposite. Instead of contract the money supply, we're going to increase the money supply. But the difference was he didn't give it to the people. He kept it within the banks. He kept it within the banks and said not to loan it to the people, to put it back into the equity markets. So now the entire thing, the entire illusion is starting to fall apart. And the Fed doesn't know what to do. They're puzzled by this because, it's completely falling apart. And they give you financial babble where people don't understand what is really going on. And what he's really saying is, listen, this is what it comes down to. If we keep pumping up the markets, our end result is an economic collapse. If we remove the money printing and we stop feeding the banks and the banks stop purchasing all these stocks, we're going to have an economic collapse. So which way would you rather have it? Would you like me to continue money printing until we can't do it anymore and we see inflation get out of control? Or do you want me to just stop right now and just have a collapse right now at this point? And this is basically what is going on. And it doesn't matter which way he does it. Collapse now, collapse later, collapse in the summer, collapse in September. Guess what? It's still a collapse. A collapse is a collapse is a collapse. So let's move on here. Now, Brazil is having a lot of problems with protesters. Brazil is going to deploy national security troops against the protesters. The Brazilian government will deploy National Public Security Force in 5 cities, hosting the FIFA football tournament in an effort to contain the ongoing protests across the country. And we're seeing protests in Turkey, we're seeing protests in Brazil, and this is going to spread all around the world. Now, there was another article that said, bye-bye Fifth Amendment, Supreme Court decides anything you don't say can and be will used against you. And basically what they're saying is you have to invoke the Fifth Amendment for it to work for you. If you say nothing, you do not invoke the Fifth Amendment. And this is what they're saying. And again, when I said this before, when they start taking away rights from the people, the economic collapse is coming sooner. And this was encapsulated in many other things that I said, and there was a list of things. Basically, when they're taxing us more, when they're removing more of our rights, when war is on the horizon, when the police state has been increased, when there's more military drills going on with live fire, all of this indicates that the collapse is moving forward and accelerating. Now, Bloomberg and the NYPD is being sued for spying on Muslims, which is basically against the Constitution. It basically against the Fourth Amendment, which is completely unconstitutional for him to do this. But it seems like nobody cares. There's no rule of law anymore, and Bloomberg is just completely out of control, doing whatever he wants, making statements that he wants, whatever whenever he wants, saying that he has the third largest military force in the world or something like that. And he is just continually making more and more laws, taking more and more rights away. And I've said this before. Those states that have the largest debt, who are on teetering on default, are the ones who are creating these draconian laws. And that would be New York, Connecticut, Maryland, Illinois, California, Colorado. I say Maryland. These are the states that are having lots of problems. Did I say New Jersey? New Jersey is another one. These are the states that are having many, many problems and are teetering on default. Now, moving on, Biden concedes that the gun push falters in Congress, and they can't make any headway with this new gun bill. And we know the gun bill and the UN Arms Treaty is pending in the Senate, and it's going nowhere right now. That's what's happening. And usually when bills go nowhere, the U.S. government looks for an event or creates an event, which is a false flag. And right now they have no other option but to do this. And what could that be? Because Biden in the past has said, and so is John Kerry, has said by August the UN Arms Treaty and the gun control bill will be signed by August. Now, we do have a march on all the state capitals coming up, which gun owners will do with loaded or non-loaded weapons. And there was Doug Hagman coming out saying that the DH Insider was reporting that something major was going to happen between July 4th and July 7th, or around that period of time. So we can see where something is definitely going to happen. And the DH Insider was even calling for martial law at this point, and in each state and each city, the actions of what would be happening will differ between each city and each state. So we can definitely see something's happening. Something is getting out of control. Now, the FBI uses drones in U.S., says Mueller. FBI Director Robert Mueller acknowledged the law enforcement agency uses drone and aircraft in the United States for surveillance in certain difficult cases. And he goes on to say, Mueller told the Senate Judiciary Committee on Wednesday that drones are used by the FBI in very, 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 very minimal way and very seldom. Which, if they're using them, they're using them at full force. Just like they're just a little bit spying on them, but spying on the American people. So we know that most of the time, these government officials completely lie about what they're doing. Now, there was an article that I found that said overseas cyber attack hit list memo for Obama to include the possibility of government targeting U.S. And this article goes on to say that Obama is making that hit list of targets, and General Alexander from the NSA has said that they have targeted Iran with Stuxnet, and they have been using cyber attacks on different countries. And basically this has come out to say that, and I'll read this to you, the directive provides that any cyber operations intended or likely to produce cyber effects within the United States require the approval of the President, except in the case of an emergency cyber action. When such an emergency arises, several departments, including the Department of Defense, are authorized to conduct such domestic operations without presidential approval. And it also goes on to say that the president and the U.S. government can create and do cyber attacks within the United States. And this is very strange to me. And what I've said what I've said before is that cyber attacks are the main event for the U.S. government if they cannot get the gun bills, CISPA passed, which is also pending in the Senate, and the get us into war with some type of false flag. Because I hate to say it, the chemical weapon propaganda has completely failed, and no one is buying it here in America. The polls show America and Congress, the people of America, do not want to go to war. And the only way to push this agenda, just like the gun bill, is to have a false flag and to push the people into going into war. And we are going to see something like this. And for the president to create and to basically say that there is an emergency and implement a cyber attack within the United States, he can do this easily with the executive order of preparedness, where he does not need Congress or the people of the U.S. To say there's an emergency. He doesn't need their approval. He can just declare it, and this falls directly into that, where he could cyber attack anything within the United States. And I mean, what would you cyber attack? Let's say militias are forming and we're communicating over the internet. He can cyber attack, the internet and, cut that completely out. So we don't know why this is in here, but I thought it was very interesting that this was part of the emergency cyber action, and all it needs is the approval of the president. Now, moving on, there is a toy gun march in Washington, D.C., scheduled for July 3rd, which is very interesting also because it corresponds to the July 4th march on the capitals by gun owners with or without loaded weapon. And this article goes on to say, last week, Austin Peterson, creator of the Toy Gun March, received approval from a board of 30 federal officers to move forward with the armed march scheduled for July 3rd in Washington, D.C. The march will be at 9 a.m., starting at the Arlington Memorial Bridge and ending at the National Mall. Now, this seems very interesting because this was kind of the march that Kokesh wanted to do on July 4th, and this is with toy weapons. And basically what this article goes on to say is the following. The event aims to be a peaceful protest of citizens armed with toy water guns, stemming from a previously planned armed march with real guns originally planned for the 4th of July in D.C. The plans for that event were met with much resistance from local law enforcement vowing to take action against protesters, resulting in organizer Adam Kokesh eventually canceling the protest, however brought about the creation of the Toy Gun March. This, to me, seems like this is going to be some type of setup somehow, some way, somehow, especially with people marching on the capitals. This is being marched on July 3rd, and it just seems like something is going to happen, and the DH Insider, who reported that something's going to happen on July 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, didn't know the exact date, but around that period. So what do we have happening here? Kokesh's march with real guns has been replaced with the same exact march with toy guns. Now, the FBI, CIA, or any other type of agency can infiltrate this group, and they can say that someone actually has a real gun. That person with the real gun can fire on people, and then the armed forces The military can step in, put boots on the ground. The police force can put, and DHS can arrive, and this thing can turn into a huge, huge, huge mess, which turns out to be a false flag, which then could move into martial law, saying gun people are crazy. They were supposed to march with toy guns, but they actually have real guns. And the same gun owners are now marching on the capitals at the same time the next day, and this whole thing can completely fall apart and could work to get those gun laws that are pending in the Senate passed. Martial law can be implemented, gun confiscation can be implemented, and this just seems that something is not right, and it feels like it's a huge setup, just like the quantum cyber attack drill, which is also scheduled right before July 4th, which is June 28th, which is a Friday, which I already discussed. And this whole thing seems like it is a complete setup, and I would be actually shocked if nothing happens on June 28th through July 7th, because everything seems to be pointing in that direction that something will happen. The last thing I have here is that basically there was a poll, and the majority of Americans do not trust newspapers and the television news anymore. Mainstream media is kind of losing their respectfulness and their trustworthiness, and a lot of Americans right now are not listening to the newspaper, or reading the newspaper, or listening to television news anymore, because especially with CNN doing all those things that having Nancy Gray in a parking lot and pretending to have a satellite hookup with a woman who was in the same parking lot, or during the Iraq War having the correspondents on a soundstage and pretending they're in the middle of the Iraq War. So there's a lot of things that are happening, and they're realizing that the mainstream media has not been telling them the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Now listen, everyone. Something is definitely coming. It is, like 2 weeks away. There is some type of false flag or a small type of cyber attack false flag coming with this drill. And again, usually they usually have some type of false flag when they have drills put into place. And we see all around the country that DHS, local law enforcement, have been training, and they've been training for the last year and a half. So they are getting ready for something. They need laws that are pending in the Senate passed, and we know that something is definitely coming by September, where the markets, the economy, are going to take a dive. So if you haven't started to prepare, I would, in the next 2 weeks or so, I would start stocking up on batteries, food, water, medical supplies, weapons, just to be sure you are ready for what is coming in the first week of July. Listen, everyone, I want to thank you very much for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.